I'm Brian Pierce for another edition of the Pierce Brothers. Today we're going to talk about the Ruger Blackhawk 357. The original Blackhawk 357 was produced from 1955 until 1963, and that's the one we're going to focus on today. But I'll say this, continue to watch because this ties into some additional videos, so it'll be a continuation series. And we also have announcements of a new model that's coming out, and you will see it first right here. And you will see a special edition that's coming out that will be of real interest to six-gun fans. So please stay tuned. I believe at least one of those will be within the next month that announcement will come. The other one will be within probably 2 months. So just stay tuned. But back to the original Blackhawk. This is a great story. You know, Bill Ruger, small guy in the industry, began these little standard 22 auto in 1953. He introduced the single six, which was an instant success. Interesting, in 1955, the 357 was only 20 years old. Smith & Wesson had been offering it in the registered Magnum, and that eventually became, in the post-war years, just the Smith & Wesson 357, or what later became known as the Model 27. They also offered it in the Highway Patrolman, which was the Model 28. So 1955 was actually a pretty interesting year. Great Western was doing the Frontier revolver in it as well. Colt was doing what they called the Colt 357 model. That was the actual name, and that was similar to what evolved into the Colt Trooper. And of course, the Python was announced in 1955. That was a great year for shooters. At any rate, Ruger came out with these Blackhawk 357, and this was built on a frame that was similar in size to Colt, but larger. It measured 1.670-inch outside diameter of the cylinder, so it had a little more strength there. And the original version was actually looked like this one, just black grips, 4 5/8-inch barrel, had a flat top frame, a micro steel rear side, a ramp front. Great little gun, 4 5/8-inch barrel. I gotta say, go back a minute. Back in the 1920s, 20 to 25 years prior, Elmer Keith had been writing a series of articles in American Rifleman and other publications about his modifications and custom revolvers he called it wrecking the Colt single action. They're welding the frames into a flat top, putting adjustable sights on them, ramp or target type front sights, other modifications to make them more reliable in the action. And this influenced Bill Ruger greatly. So instead of bringing out just a Colt single action pattern gun, he brought out a gun that had those features, adjustable sights. It was fitted with a coil mainspring, piano wire mainspring instead of a flat leaf spring. Had a coil trigger return spring that you can plunge right behind the trigger, you can see. Had a coil spring for the bolts, and so they were kind of almost unbreakable. Very reliable systems. The trigger and hammer setup was very similar to the Colt. It's still recommended to only carry 5 rounds in these guns because there is a safety notch, but breaking that notch out of the hammer or the tip off the trigger, the gun can still fire, and it's not hard to make that happen. So it's really recommend to load 1, skip 1, load 4, and then bring the gun to full cock and let the hammer down, and it will come out on the empty chamber. You can also see the empty chamber from the side of the cylinder to confirm that the firing pin is setting behind the empty chamber. Safe, super safe gun in that method. Some people don't believe that's the way it should be. Some want to carry it with the hammer between the firing pin between the cartridges. That's okay, but I've still seen those cylinders get churned, and I've also it also will leave a drag mark on the cylinder, which is unnecessary. Another feature that Bill Ruger did was that he put a frame-mounted firing pin there, which helped deal with the high pressures associated with the 357 Magnum, which are currently at 35,000 psi. At that time, in the 50s, it was 43,000 cup, if I remember correctly. More precise measuring method means it's today in PSI, of course. They came standard in 2 barrel lengths, initially the 4 5/8 and then the 6.5 inch. and both walnut and black rubber grips. The black rubber were standard at first. There is a rare length, a 10-inch length, that is very desirable. I remember years ago I was in Sweden spending time in Norma's ballistic lab with them, and we were going through some really cool handguns in their vault, old Lugers and high powers and other things. And all of a sudden I come across Smith & Wesson 1950 targets, and I pull out this Ruger flat top Blackhawk 10-inch barrel gun. I'm like, oh, anyway, someday that gun might be mine, but we'll see. They're rare. They didn't make very many of them. But there were some changes coming. Now, to back up a minute, the Ruger Blackhawk had a grip frame that was very similar in shape to the Colt single action Army pattern gun. And some people actually complained about it a little bit because under heavier recoil, they seemed to think that the trigger guard would hit their second finger. And so at some point, Bill Ruger in 1963 decided to do a modification, and he developed, this was now Koa cast alloy grip frame. And he changed the design from an XR3 designation to describe that part to an XR3 red. So the red stood for redesigned. And all it did really was it extended it back a little bit, give a little bit more room between that second finger and the trigger guard. Believe it or not, there's a lot of people that much prefer the later grip frame. Others die hard, swear by the original XR3. It's a personal preference. There's not a right or wrong, just a personal preference. Another thing that should be mentioned is that Bill Ruger was really an industry leader in doing investment casting, and that allowed this gun to sell for $87.50 new. So basically, he eliminated a lot of machining and making frames and major parts, and there's nothing wrong with castings. They can be incredibly strong. They actually mix the molecular structure of steel enough that it actually is stronger than bar stock steel, because the bar stock, the grain of the steel actually lays in a lineal position. But with investment casting, it mixes it up, and it was a great idea. But ultimately, these guns became where they were made of 4140 chromoly, rock weld properly, and so forth. Another thing that he changed in 1963 that's notable is the ejector rod housing became aluminum, and the top of the frame. There was a pretty significant change here in that the top of the frame on the original 1953 through 1962 model was a flat top with a micro rear sight. In 1963, changed it so there was little ears up beside the sight, and it changed to an alloy adjustable rear sight, no longer a micro. And it worked well. The purists like the looks of the flat top better. I certainly do, but there's nothing to fault with this design, with the later design. Great little guns. There was options. I'm not going to go over collections on these stuff, but you could get factory engraving. Something that's very desirable is the factory stag grips like this. Collectors really get excited over those. You could get ivory with them if you wanted. But one thing about Bill Ruger was he knew who his buyer was. They were the working man, the guy that needed a super reliable gun, and at a modest cost, something that didn't break him because he was a family man. He's working a hard job, come home, paying bills, so forth and so on. And Bill wanted to make sure his guns were priced where the average working man could afford to buy his guns. And of course, we know the rest of the history. It's made Ruger a huge success, and they still kind of hold to that same policy today. Ruger guns are always a great value. But these guns, one thing that I got to sidetrack a minute. I had a friend years ago that said there's no greater deterrent than the sound of a Ruger single action being cocked. A friend of mine in Alaska had an intruder breaking in the middle of the night, and he woke up and they were pounding on the front door trying to get in, and he takes his Ruger old model and he cocks it as the guy came through the door. It was dead silent, and he was sitting on the opposite side of the room by this point. He cocked it, and the sound of that gun, the intruder could not get out of there fast enough just hearing that single action cock, because he knew what came next. So kind of interesting. What happened, his car actually broke down a mile or two down the road, and he thought, I'll deal with it tomorrow. He walked home, it was dark, and his car wasn't out front, so the guy thought that for sure nobody was home. So he was breaking into that home with confidence, but he did not like the sound of that Ruger cocking. So another feature that occurred during the 1963 through 1973 production era was the 9mm cylinder became available, which is a really desirable trait or feature when you're buying these on the used market or as a collector, whatever. These guns were great guns. They were great shooters. I've got a number of these in addition to what's here. I've found with a little bit of load development and so forth that these guns, man, they'll shoot ragged holes. They 25 yards. You know, a good one will stay under an inch or so, or at least shoot an inch at least. And they're great shooters, great guns. I bought my first one. I don't remember the year, but I remember the price. It was $65, and have had many of them since. A lot of experience with these guns. Good solid gun. There was also an option of getting a brass backstrap or buying the brass backstrap as factory installed, or as an option you could install later. It was designed like the Ruger Super Blackhawk. It added quite a bit of weight. Some people didn't care for the squared back trigger guard as much. You know, bit a lot of shooters on that second finger, but that's again a personal preference. But these guns were ultra reliable. In fact, you'd be really hard pressed to find a handgun that's more reliable than these guns. Now, to shift gears a minute, these have been very, very popular guns to customize. So they, probably the most common conversion is to convert them to 44 Special, and you know, dress them up, nice stocks. You can even put a Colt single action backstrap and trigger guard on them and alleviate the aluminum, which is, I don't really have an issue with aluminum for a modest priced gun like these, but going steel changes the appearance of the gun. Of course, nice finish work, engraving. You know, the sky's the limit what you can do with these guns on the custom work. I've converted several of them to 45 Colt and 44 Special. They actually work really nice in those conversions. But what happened in 1955 when Bill Ruger announced this gun, he said next it will become available in 44 Special and 45 Colt. That did not happen until much later. In other words, until 2005 or later with the new model Blackhawk, with the reintroduction of the 50th anniversary. Meanwhile, the reason it did not happen was Bill Ruger, of course, discovered that there was a cartridge called the 44 Magnum in development. It hadn't been announced yet. It was a Smith & Wesson and Remington partnership that were working on that. And an employee of Bill Ruger's found some scrap 44 ammunition in an industry dumping ground. He found it, thought it was quite interesting. He took it to Bill Ruger, and Bill immediately set out to design a gun. He realized that, okay, it would have chambered in this. Lengthwise, it would have worked in this gun, but Bill actually built up a sample gun or two, supposedly, or I've been reported that. He ultimately decided that he needed a bigger, stronger frame, so he developed the Blackhawk 44 Magnum that came out late 56, early 57, right there. Basically the same gun, but the cylinder window was larger in diameter, so it could house a larger, stronger cylinder and longer to accommodate the longer cartridge, especially with teeth style or long nose type bullets. And so he never got around to introducing the 44 Special or 45 Colt. Now, interesting, and I'll do a bigger video on this later, the 44 Magnum Blackhawk, that was the same size cylinder frame as what appeared on the Super Blackhawk in 1959. That's the same one that the 30 carbine, the 45 Colt, the 41 Magnum, all those were built on that same cylinder frame. So you get a bigger gun. These are interesting because you get a smaller, handier, lighter gun. Another thing I very much like about them is that the smaller frame puts the axis of the board down lower, a little less leverage and recoil when you're shooting it. Lighter gun, smaller gun, easier to carry, and you know, pancake holsters, however you're carrying it, it's just a lighter, easier gun. These guns in 4 5/8 inch barrel, they're just a little over 37 ounces, so a very practical gun to carry when you convert them to 44, 45 Colt. they become lighter yet. But any rate, it's the Ruger Blackhawk is a great gun. But what happened tragically, there were some people that did not understand the load 5 cartridges, don't rely on the safety, just keep an empty round under the chamber. Ruger's advertised extensively about that. They do make an aftermarket conversion kit where they change the hammer and trigger and the lock work to where you can carry 6 in those. That's up to you if you want to do that. Make sure you save the old parts should you send that back to Ruger. They will do that conversion for free. I still like the old action better, but that's a personal thing. But ultimately, Bill Ruger decided that he needed to upgrade the action to a new model, and that appeared in 1973, first with the single 6, and then followed by the 357, 44 mag, and other calibers. The new model is quickly identifiable by 2 pins in the frame, whereas the old model has 3 screws. So sometimes you'll hear the old models referred to as the 3-screw version and so forth. The new model, you open the loading gate and it frees, it drops the cylinder stop bolt and cylinder becomes free, loads 6 rounds, and it has a transfer bar that allows the safe carry 6 rounds. Very bulletproof design, very good design. It's almost foolproof, if you will. So there's no such thing as foolproof, but it's pretty darn close. Very rugged, reliable action. So that came about in 73, and these guns were gone, no longer produced again. But what's interesting is that the 357 at that time got moved to the 44 frame. So suddenly you had a bigger, heavier gun than these. And again, the axis of the bore was raised a little bit. More steel on the cylinder and so on. They didn't quite balance and feel as good as the old model. So to savvy sysgunners, the old model, the original Blackhawk 357, still high demand gun. Now in 2005, with the 50th anniversary of the Blackhawk 357, Ruger came out with a special edition, and they kept that in the product line. They basically duplicated more or less the same size frame as the original Blackhawk 357. That was a huge welcome addition to me. I instantly let Ruger know, offering 45 Colt, 44 Special, and other calibers. We'll talk about that another time. But the gun's been a big success. In that same year, they introduced the new Vaquero, which is based on the same cylinder frame size, but of course fixed sights. Been very successful with that model. So again, as I stated earlier, there will be a new caliber offered in that frame size, or new to that frame size, coming up soon. You'll see it first here. I'm excited about it. It's going to be a fun one to test and review. There's also going to be a special edition that we will announce within a month here. So, and that's a different thing. So, we're excited for those changes, for those new guns. Again, the Blackhawk 357 is a classic in its own right. They're among people that really understand sysguns. It's highly desirable, very reliable, handsome gun, and the single action, man, you can't go wrong with them. They're ultra reliable. I could throw it in the sand right here in front of me and pick it up, shake it, and blow it off a little bit, and it's going to work. And I've actually done that, not on purpose, but I carry a gun daily in the hills, riding horses and so forth and so on. And I've had a lot of, working cattle, other things. I've had a lot of bad things happen, and they're just nothing like a single action for extreme reliability. So anyway, thanks for joining us today, and we will see you next time on the Pierce Brothers. Thanks for watching.